Before we start, I'd like to make it clear that this isn't a tutorial. It's more a collection of dilemmas I encountered while trying to build my first Sculpey sculpture, and how I attempted to solve them. Last year I became very frustrated creatively. I'd set out to complete a documentary project that ended up taking most of my time and energy. Although I had the passion to keep going with it, it wasn't going anywhere fast. So I had to take a break and recharge my batteries. I knew I still wanted to make something, but I didn't know what. My traditional and digital drawings had reached a plateau and I needed to do something different. After watching various videos of Adam Savage building things in his shop, and Bob Ross painting happy little trees, their infectious enthusiasm paid off, and I realised I needed to make something tangible that I could hold in my hands. More importantly, I wanted to learn something new. Sculpture seemed to tick all those boxes, as I could then learn how to paint them as well. There was a huge amount of research that needed to be done before I could start. YouTube was a valuable resource of information with lots of talented people sharing their insight, and I was struck by how positive and encouraging the creative communities are, especially when compared to some of the more cynical parts of the internet. Because I tend to work slowly, picking a type of clay that would be easy to work with over time was a priority. Polymer clays were recommended due to their ease of use and the fact that they don't dry out until baked. Considering I planned to make relatively small maquettes and figures, Super Sculpey ended up being my weapon of choice. It comes in a variety of different colours and strengths, with beige being the most readily available. Although I had some previous experience modelling plasticine, Sculpey is a much more expensive product, and I didn't want to waste it all at once. Setting aside my main goal of sculpting a stylised Bilbo Baggins from an old drawing, I decided to start small and do a few tests first. Originally that meant rolling out clay spheres and baking them in the oven to see if any cracks formed, but when I looked at them all laid out in front of me I started to see something else. The big sphere looked somewhat like a head, and the oval one was a bit like a body. The smallest ones were hands and feet, and soon enough, piece by piece I had something much more interesting. It started to resemble a vague approximation of the trainer from Pokémon Red, which worked out great because once he was built he wouldn't need a complex paint job. This little design tangent was infinitely more rewarding than the featureless spheres we had before. Plus, if I was going to mess it all up, then I'd rather it be at a small scale than the 6-inch Hobbit. It turns out that modelling even simple things is pretty hard, with the head taking the most time. You can see how discoloured it got from dirt and dust where I spent so long working out the details. I'd read that rubbing alcohol is used to smooth out blemishes and surface dust. Over here in the UK it's called surgical spirit and chemists don't always stock it. It took a few days to track some down and it solved most of those problems. In order to keep the design simple I used the original trainer sprite from Pokémon Red as inspiration, and then Ken Sugimori's concept art for details like the shoes. Considering I didn't plan this out on paper beforehand, it's lucky that each body part fit together so well. Any bigger and it might have needed wire armature or a base to stand on. According to Sculpey's recommended baking time of 15 minutes per 6mm of thickness, I put him in the oven to pre-bake for about an hour. The reason I did this was to lock in the basic forms that I was happy with, and to provide a sturdy surface for secondary details. With an hour to spare I quite happily reread A Song of Ice and Fire, and almost fell asleep next to the oven with its steady hum. After successfully pre-baking without any cracks or burns, I re-examined the model. You can see how his centre of balance is slightly off here. On the one hand I could leave it as it is and excuse the mistake as part of the learning process, but because sculpture is such a lasting art form, there's a responsibility to fix it, so I chopped his ugly feet off and tried again. Each of these problems posed new challenges and sparked my imagination, the most important being the brim of the cap, which was attached using Sculpey's Bacon Bond glue. Compared to other art forms, it seems like sculpture is a more delayed gratification. There's no instant results, you really have to build everything up over time. When it got to layering on clothing, I realised that you have to tailor everything to fit. It's not like a 2D image where you draw the form from one side, you have to legitimately create it to exist at all angles. In hindsight, I'm quite pleased with how the collar and vest turned out. The neck of the t-shirt is a bit wide, but the fingerprint provides some texture. Once the cap, vest, collars and belt buckle had been applied, he was ready to go back in the oven. Being able to rebake the model was especially useful for these fragile extensions that help sell the character. When he was done, he looked a bit toasted, but it was nothing a coat of paint couldn't fix. Sanding was easily my favourite part of the process. Slowly refining a surface to achieve symmetry was very relaxing. By carefully sanding down the soles of the feet, the balance could be better adjusted to prevent the leaning, and the extra height of his new feet helped balance him out proportionately. Painting is one of those things that should make more sense than it does. While I can draw and shade adequately with a pencil, doing the same with a brush feels foreign. Acrylic paint seems to be the standard for Sculpey and miniatures in general, so I bought a few from Golden. Most of these earthy colours were intended for Bilbo Baggins, but they'll do just fine for this. It might have been a mistake, but I didn't use a primer. I went right ahead and painted directly onto the Sculpey, using a white base coat to get used to the brushes and consistency. At first, I think I layered it on too thick, or my brush strokes were too short, but I tried to fix this with each new layer. The majority of the character is brightly coloured, so I only had to mix jeans and a skin tone. The belt buckle ended up being a bit too big overall, but by then it was too late to change. Rather than sticking with boring grey, I used some iridescent bronze to give it some sparkle. The shoe design took longest due to how fiddly it is to paint fine lines with the brush. The reference art is also inconsistent in its depiction, so I done the best with what I had. Colouring the 3D eyes was a real hassle and I needed to make numerous corrections to the paint job. Tutorials suggested painting the figure in the same order that you get dressed, so skin, hair, eyes, underwear, outerwear, and then details. I probably should have let each coat dry for longer before painting the next one, but that's information I'll put into practice next time. You might notice that I've neglected to put a logo on the hat. That's because it was difficult enough painting his mouth on straight, let alone a more intricate design. As for the backpack, I thought I could cheat this by stamping on the coloured rectangles with a piece of Sculpey, but that didn't produce the results I wanted either. In the end, I bit the bullet and painted them on by hand. So what did I learn? Well, all throughout this process it was trial and error, finding out what works best and making the most of what I have. Like filmmaking, you can't rely on special effects to save a bad story. The same applies here, even a great paint job can only do so much with a shoddy sculpt. Going forwards, I need to make sure all minor details are modelled in 3D, rather than mocked up with paint. For this particular character, that means eyebrows, pocket, zips and shoe bevels should have been included before the final bake. Having said that, he's quite cute how he is, and it's not a bad effort for a first model. When the glaze arrives, I'll happily dip him in and consider him finished. By now, I'm eager to move on and apply what I've learned to the next project. Maybe I'll see you there. Thanks for watching.